I bought my lake cabin 5 years ago, long before the area got swallowed up by the shiny, Lakewood Lakeside Villas development. Back then, it was just me, the cabin, the water, and the occasional fish that wasn't smart enough to ignore my bait. I purchased the land outright, title clean, and even had it surveyed twice for peace of mind. My little slice of heaven sat on a quiet bend of the lake where the water mirrored the sky, and the wooden dock creaked like it had secrets it wanted to tell. But like all peaceful places, it didn't stay untouched for long. A few years after I moved in, a swarm of luxury developers, lawsuits, and big money investors rolled in, building cookie-cutter mansions and selling them to people who thought lake life meant sipping $15 cocktails on a designer deck while complaining about bugs. And of course, with the new crowd came the HOA, self-appointed rulers of all things within their invisible fiefdom. The loudest of them all, Karen Blevins, self-proclaimed president for life of the Lakewood HOA. If you've ever seen someone who manages to weaponize a clipboard, sunglasses, and a scowl, you've seen a Karen in her natural habitat. Karen didn't like me from day one. My cabin didn't match the aesthetic vision she claimed she was protecting, which really meant my weathered cedar siding clashed with her preferred, modern coastal gray, theme. She couldn't actually enforce HOA rules on me. My property wasn't in their jurisdiction, but that didn't stop her from trying to encourage compliance, through weekly notes stuffed in my mailbox, emails filled with veiled threats, and more than one surprise inspection, where she'd stand at the edge of my yard, jotting down nonsense on her clipboard. I ignored her. At first, it was even a little entertaining watching her get frustrated when she realized her HOA bylaws didn't mean a thing on my land. But things took a turn one hot July afternoon when Karen, with her son Tyler in tow, decided to up the ante. Tyler was a college sophomore with the charisma of a damp sponge and a sense of entitlement that could block out the sun. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood behind his mom like he was waiting for the world to hand him keys to whatever he pointed at. That day, I was fixing a section of my dock when I saw them striding up my gravel path like they owned the place. Karen didn't even bother with a hello before announcing, "You'll be vacating the cabin by next month. Tyler's moving in. This is perfect for him and his friends. It's closer to the water than any of the villas." I swear she said it with the same tone someone might use to tell you your order at a coffee shop was ready. I laughed, thinking she was kidding. She wasn't. She produced some flimsy HOA property reassignment form with her signature and a stamp I suspect came from the kids' craft aisle at Walmart. When I reminded her, again, that my property was outside her jurisdiction, she went red in the face and started ranting about community integration, lake access rights, and HOA-approved resource allocation. I let her spew her nonsense, then calmly pointed to the bright red, private property, sign bolted to the fence and told them to leave before I called the sheriff. Tyler muttered something under his breath about old guys hoarding prime real estate as they stomped back up the path. I figured that would be the end of it, an annoying interaction that I could file under weird stuff HOA people do and forget. But the following week, I came home to find my driveway blocked by a moving truck and a bunch of 20-something guys unloading beer coolers, gaming chairs, and what looked like half a fraternity house's worth of junk. Tyler was standing in the middle of my front lawn, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. HOA approved it, he said smugly, as if that was supposed to mean anything. Inside, my blood pressure was climbing, but I kept my voice even. I gave him 2 minutes to get his stuff off my property or I'd start tossing it into the lake. They laughed, until I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office. That's when Karen herself came storming down the road, flanked by 2 HOA board members, shouting about how I was violating community housing directives and obstructing a sanctioned tenant transfer. The deputies arrived, took one look at my deed, and told everyone to leave. But I could see the fury burning in Karen's eyes. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just going to let this go, she was going to push until something snapped. And I decided, then and there, that if she wanted a war, she'd get one. After that run-in with the moving truck, I knew Karen wouldn't stop until she either got my cabin or found a way to make my life so miserable that I'd want to sell. I'd seen her pull that exact trick on a few other longtime residents whose homes were technically outside HOA jurisdiction but still near enough to be absorbed into their community improvement plans. Her usual tactic was to drown them in complaints, send building inspectors for safety checks, and rile up neighbors until the target gave up and moved away. The problem for her was, I wasn't the type to roll over. My cabin wasn't just a weekend retreat, it was a part of my life I'd fought for. Every beam, every nail, and every inch of that property had been earned the hard way, and I wasn't about to let an overzealous clipboard warrior take it away. That's when I remembered the old boundary dispute map I had from the original survey. My property extended farther than people realized, including a narrow strip of land along the gravel service road that led to a small cluster of prefab offices on the far side of the development. Those offices, they belonged to none other than Blevins Property Management, LLC, Karen's family company. She ran all her HOA business from there, processed payments, kept her files, and held her precious board meetings in the big conference room with the ridiculous marble table she liked to brag about. And the best part, that strip of land I owned was the only direct access road to the office parking lot. Technically, the HOA could reach the offices by taking a much longer route around the lake, but that way involved an unpaved, washed-out trail only a lifted 4x4 could handle, and her Lexus SUV definitely wasn't making that trip without losing a bumper. The plan came together almost immediately. I went down to the hardware store, loaded up my truck with heavy-duty cedar fence panels, concrete posts, and a stack of bright, "No trespassing, private property" signs. My neighbor, Carl, who'd been at odds with the HOA himself for years, saw what I was doing and offered to help. By sundown the next day, we had a sturdy, 8-foot fence running the full length of my boundary along the road, complete with a locked gate at the far end. On my side of the gate was a keypad entry system. On her side, nothing but a "private property" sign staring her in the face. I made sure the installation was done by the book, permits, legal documentation, photographs of property markers, so there'd be no wiggle room for her to cry foul. I even dropped by the county office to file an official, restricted access notice on the property record, just to be extra sure. 2 days later, I was on my porch sipping coffee when I heard the familiar whine of Karen's Lexus engine coming down the road, followed by the abrupt sound of brakes screeching. I didn't even have to look to know she'd found my fence. A second later, the shouting started. "Open this gate," she yelled, hammering on the cedar with her manicured hands. "This is community property, you can't do this." I strolled down the path, nice and slow, coffee still in hand. "Actually, Karen," I said, holding up the laminated copy of my deed, "this is my property. Always has been. You've been trespassing every time you've driven through here." Her face went from red to purple in seconds. She ranted about how I was interfering with essential community functions and violating easement rights. I told her there was no recorded easement and invited her to prove otherwise in court. Meanwhile, behind her, I could see her office staff standing around the parking lot, clearly confused about how they were going to get their cars out. By noon, it was chaos. HOA board members were parked along the side of the fence, phones pressed to their ears, calling everyone from county commissioners to the sheriff's office. Trouble for them was, the deputies had already been briefed. I'd shown them the property lines and the legal right I had to fence it. They weren't about to get in the middle of what was clearly a losing battle for the HOA. Karen's company operations ground to a halt. No deliveries, no in-person meetings, no clients coming or going. She had to walk a quarter mile around the lake trail just to get in, which I'm sure felt like a death march in her heels. Tyler even showed up at one point, demanding I stop harassing his mom's business. I just pointed to the sign and told him, "Private property, son." "You wouldn't understand." He muttered something about lawsuits before trudging back to his car. What I didn't realize at the time was that the fence was only the start. Blocking her office access didn't just inconvenience Karen, it hit her in the wallet. Clients started complaining about the hassle of getting to her meetings. Deliveries were rerouted or canceled. Board members, tired of walking in and out with stacks of paperwork, began questioning her leadership. And through it all, I stayed calm, polite, and absolutely within my legal rights. Every time she tried to provoke me, I'd just smile and remind her she was free to take the long way around the lake. The fence became a symbol, not just of my boundary, but of the one thing Karen couldn't take from me, control over my own property. And that's when I realized, she wasn't done yet. The first sign that Karen was switching tactics came in the form of a thick, overly dramatic envelope taped to my front door one Friday morning. Inside was a notice of community easement violation, printed on fancy wall letterhead, complete with her signature and an embossed gold seal that probably cost more than the paper it was on. The letter claimed my fence was unlawfully obstructing a designated community access route essential for the administration of Lakewood Villas operations, and demanded I remove it within 72 hours or face legal action and monetary damages. I couldn't help but laugh. She might as well have sent me a birthday card with a picture of herself frowning. The HOA had zero authority over my property. I'd confirmed this with 2 separate attorneys months ago, and the only access route she was talking about was the strip of land clearly marked on the county plat map as mine. Still, I knew Karen well enough to understand that this letter wasn't her endgame. It was the opening volley in what she thought was going to be a war of attrition. Sure enough, 3 days later, I got served with a formal complaint from her company's attorney, accusing me of willful obstruction of commerce and illegal seizure of community property. Now, here's where Karen's plan fell apart. She didn't realize I'd been quietly documenting everything from the day she first set foot on my driveway. I had time-stamped photographs, video recordings of her trespassing, sworn statements from neighbors who'd seen her harassing me, and, most importantly, copies of the original property deed and surveys showing there was no recorded easement or community right-of-way. The attorney she hired was clearly used to bulldozing intimidated homeowners into settlements, because when my lawyer sent back a very polite letter outlining our evidence and counterclaim for harassment, the tone changed almost immediately. Still, Karen being Karen, she doubled down. She convinced the HOA board to fund the lawsuit personally, a decision that, according to one of my friendly board member contacts, caused heated arguments during their meetings. The trial date was set for late October, which gave her months to strut around telling anyone who'd listen that she was taking me down and getting that cabin for Tyler once and for all. She even started spreading rumors that I was some kind of shady squatter who'd forged my property records, a claim so absurd it actually made a few of the more gullible residents believe her. When the court day finally arrived, she showed up in a bright red blazer like she was running for office, flanked by Tyler and 3 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I kept my approach low-key: jeans, a clean button-down, and a folder of documents so thick it could have been used as a doorstop. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for cutting through theatrics, barely let Karen's lawyer finish his opening statement before she started asking questions about the so-called easement. Where, exactly, in the recorded property records, is this easement described? She asked. The lawyer fumbled through his papers, clearly realizing too late that it wasn't there. When it was my turn, my attorney walked the court through every piece of evidence: the surveys, the plat maps, the lack of easement filings, the harassment history, and even a copy of the property reassignment form Karen had tried to hand me that first day, which got an audible chuckle from the judge. By the time we were done, Karen was shifting uncomfortably in her seat, her earlier smugness completely gone. The judge didn't just dismiss her case, she did it with prejudice, meaning she couldn't bring the same claim again. Then, in what I can only describe as poetic justice, she ordered Karen's company to pay all my legal fees, plus a small settlement for the nuisance and harassment. Walking out of that courtroom was one of the sweetest moments of my life. Tyler wouldn't even look at me, and Karen stormed past muttering about corrupt systems and incompetent lawyers. But the real kicker came a week later when I got a call from my board member contact. The HOA was in meltdown. Funding Karen's personal crusade had drained a significant chunk of their reserves, and now members were demanding an emergency election to replace her as president. For someone who prided herself on control, losing both the case and her political grip was the kind of defeat she wouldn't recover from anytime soon. After the court case, I thought Karen might finally retreat into her HOA clubhouse and lick her wounds in private. I underestimated her stubbornness. Even stripped of her legal leverage, she still tried to get under my skin. She'd park her Lexus just beyond the fence line and glare at me whenever I worked in my yard. She had Tyler film short videos about property rights violations, and post them to the HOA's social media page, framing herself as the victim of some grand injustice. None of it gained traction. Most residents had long since grown tired of her antics, but it showed me she hadn't learned her lesson. That's when fate handed me the final card I needed. One of my buddies from the county planning department stopped by one evening. Over a beer, he told me the county had just approved a major infrastructure repair on the long, rough back trail around the lake, the only other way Karen and her staff could reach her company's office without using my road. The catch: repairs wouldn't start for another 2 months, but in the meantime, the trail would be officially closed to all vehicle traffic for safety reasons. That meant the only functioning route to her business was through my locked gate. I didn't gloat, I didn't taunt, I just made sure my fence was in perfect condition, my locks were solid, and my "no trespassing" signs were freshly visible. Within days, the effect on her company was catastrophic. Delivery trucks turned around when they saw the gate. Clients called to cancel appointments. Staff members quit rather than hike a quarter-mile on foot through the overgrown footpath that skirted the lake's edge. The HOA office phones rang off the hook with complaints, not about me, but about her. She was losing money, credibility, and patience all at once. The breaking point came on a Monday morning. I was on the porch, coffee in hand, when I saw Karen standing at the gate, clipboard in one hand, cell phone in the other, clearly arguing with someone. A moment later, she marched up to the fence and shouted, "Name your price." I told her my property wasn't for sale at any price, and even if it were, she'd be the last person I'd sell to. Her face twisted into something between rage and desperation. She tried to threaten me with more legal action, but I just held up the court ruling that had dismissed her last attempt. "You're trespassing right now, Karen," I said calmly. "If you don't leave in the next 30 seconds, I'll call the sheriff." For once, she didn't have a comeback. She turned on her heel and left. 2 weeks later, I heard the news from my board member contact. Karen had been voted out as HOA president in a landslide special election. Without her leadership, the board quietly dropped all remaining disputes with me and focused on fixing the mess she'd left behind. Blevins Property Management shut its doors permanently soon after. They couldn't afford the losses from months of limited access, and no one in town wanted to do business with her after seeing how she operated. The office building itself sat empty for months, a silent monument to her downfall, until it was finally sold at auction to a fishing gear company that, ironically, had no trouble negotiating a fair access agreement with me. These days, my cabin is as peaceful as it was before the HOA ever arrived. The fence still stands, a sturdy reminder that boundaries, literal and figurative, matter. Sometimes I catch sight of Karen at the local grocery store, her once confident stride replaced with something slower, more cautious. She doesn't look at me, and I don't go out of my way to talk to her. I don't need to. She learned the hard way that my property isn't up for grabs, and that pushing the wrong person can backfire in ways you never see coming. And as for Tyler, last I heard, he's renting an apartment 2 towns over, still close enough to the lake to brag about it, but far enough that my cabin is just a speck in the distance.